Thanks so much for joining our first book club. As Erica mentioned, we have sort of a book club, but it's more like a reading list. So we wanted to actually create an actual book club where we talk about the book each month. But rather than just like get on and let's talk about someone's book, we want to do it where we get on and we talk to the author about the book. So going forward, every month, whatever book we pick, the author will be there. So picture like a book reading at your local bookstore, except virtually because we're all spread around the world and COVID. I think that's going to be really cool. We already have January and February lined up, and I've actually lined up March, April, May. I just have to send Erica the info. So like next 5 talks, all set too. So this is going to be really fun. Today we're going to kick it off with my book, 10 Years A Nomad, which Erica will hold up. I brought a copy to Mexico. I can't find it now. It's probably with my headphones. Take Two Explorers was like, yeah, it's with your headphones. So today how it's going to go is that I'm sort of going to talk about the genesis of the book, the writing process, what that was like, my favorite parts of the book, and then I'm going to take your questions, and that's going to be our next 50 minutes. So thumbs up if that's all good. Cool. I see lots of thumbs up. So let's begin in the beginning, in Genesis. So as you know, I have a book called How to Travel the World on $50 a Day. And that's really the how of travel. Erica's holding it up too. Tells you what to do, where to go, how to save money, all that jazz. That book is on its 3rd edition, and it probably won't be updated again for a very long time, maybe in like 2 years. So having like that requires updates, right? That's why Lonely Planet's, guide to France is updated like every 12 to 18 months. It all goes out of date really quickly. I was recently thumbing through it, and there's a lot of companies there that just don't even exist anymore. And I'm like, oh man, this takes an update. So I always wanted to write another book. Like I always say, like everyone has their own one book in them. I felt that I had 2. I had the how of travel and the why of travel. So 10 Years of Nomad really started off as an idea of like, okay, once I started to really want to write another book, I knew it was going to be about the why of travel. I kind of wanted like a memoir-esque kind of book that was like Rolf Potts vagabonding, meets like on the road, meets like in a sunburned country, right? Something that 20, 30 years from now, people could pick up and would still find relevant today because, the how of travel is always changing. There's always a new app. We have planes, and then we'll have spaceships, and then, we'll have hyperloops and all that shit. But the why of travel is universal. It's why we still read Mark Twain's Innocents Abroad, 130 years later, because we all can relate to traveling with people who we don't get along with and want to complain about. It's why we still read On the Road or Travels with Charlie or, even Vagabonding. And countless other books like Eat, Pray, Love, or I just blanked on one, Wild, right? So I wanted to write that kind of book that really emphasized the emotional journey of an around the world trip. Like, what was it like to want to plan to go away? What was it like going away? And how do you deal with coming home and all the emotions that takes? The highs and lows of like, what is it like to travel around the world for an extended period of time? And, talk about all the aspects, how people, how do you get the courage to go, which is often the hardest part. How to deal with friends who might think you're crazy or parents who might think you're crazy. and still think you're crazy. What's it like to try to make friends? What's it like to have relationships on the road? Um, you know, is there like psychological issues that you're trying to overcome when you're like, I never want to go home? What's it like going home, realizing you don't belong anymore, and then having to deal with that? Um, Working overseas, and then finally coming to terms with it. So like the book covers that sort of 10-year span that I consider myself nomadic. It is starts off before I go away, um, and just falling in love with travel because I had never really grown up traveling. Traveling wasn't something my family did or friends did or anybody I did. If you read the book, you know this. Um, but to me, travel was a vacation. It's where you went away for 2 weeks and then went back to work. It was like this Expedia ad that I always remember seeing. This guy comes back into this office and he's wearing sunglasses. Everyone's like, "How's your vacation?" And he takes them off and he's got this big like tan line right here. He's like, "It was excellent." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what it's like. You come back tanned and relax and you go to the grind again." But it wasn't until I met backpackers in Thailand that I realized that there was the opportunity to travel long term. Backpacking in my mind was what college kids did through Europe uh, before they graduated and got real jobs and went and followed the American dream. It wasn't until I went to Thailand that I realized people of all ages do this. People of um, families do this, couples do this, people quit their jobs to do this. That these options even existed, and so I think you really you never know what you don't know because you're not really exposed to it. I mean, I talk about in the book city tourism cards, at least in the first book, How to Travel the World, and it really wasn't until 2 years into traveling that I really started using them because when you're backpacking, nobody really talks about going to see lots of attractions because it's expensive and we're all broke. Um, and so nobody really walks into a city tourism board and is like, "Hey, I want to see all this stuff." And like, "Well, why don't you buy this pass that lets you see it all for one low price?" And so it's like, wow, I didn't really know these things exist. And I had been traveling for a while. And so I think you never really know what you don't know, which is one of the reasons I love travel so much, um, because it expands your mind and lets you really see that it's like that Henry Rollins quote: "The best way to learn about your country is to leave it." And travel really lets you show like there's a lot of ways to do things, and maybe that you don't know there are better ways to do things. So I wanted a book that really showcased that. So I started writing the book, and the first version was pretty terrible. As Hemingway said, the first draft of anything is shit. Um, and it was really just a linear. It was like I did this, then I did that, and then I did this, and then this happened, and then here we are 10 years later. And I cut it off at 2016 because one, a decade's a good amount of time for a memoir, but that was when I really felt like, okay, I'm ready to like settle down. There were a whole bunch of false starts, as you know, in the book, where I come home in like 2012 and I'm like, I'm going to do this. And then I don't do it. And then like 2014, and I'm like, I'm going to do this. And then I don't do that. But it was around 2016, as I don't want to spoil the ending, but you're at the book club talk. So, you should have read the book by now. So when I met the girl in the book, I call Samantha. It's not a real name, but I'm not going to, can't out people. And then she wanted to keep traveling together, and I realized that I wanted to stay together in one place. And that was when I realized, like, I'd much rather like have a bookcase and a couch than keep living out of a backpack any longer. And now I have 5 bookcases, and I'm actually in need of a 6th. So it's going to be quite difficult when I leave my apartment in April If I don't get another one, I'm going to pay a lot of storage. It's just all books. Um, but so that's where I sort of ended it in 2016. Though, as many of you know, I got knifed in Colombia last year. I was like, damn it, if only this happened a few years earlier, it would have made for a good part of the book. Because it's like, what happens? And then that starts a story, but I digress as a writer. And so I really wrote it really linearly. And that is very boring, because where's the action, right? Like, um, it just it's just a long diary entry. And one of the things that was really helpful in going back, because so much of the trip actually is the first 18 months. That sort of sets the stage for everything. Is that I kept a journal. Every day I wrote down not only how much I spent because I was trying to stay on budget, but like what I did and the thoughts I had. And going back through that was actually really interesting because I had forgotten the names of so many people. I had forgotten I had a lot of experiences, like I messed up dates. And it's like really interesting just to see how memory changes, 14 years later and what you do remember and how some of those memories blur together. And you're like, oh yeah, that happened. I totally forgot that thing happened. And one of the things that I'll mention that I didn't write about it in the book, but I totally had forgotten that had happened was that when I went to Copenhagen in 2006, I, was like, does anyone want to share a room? Because, back in China, stay cheap. And back then in Southeast Asia, nobody had dorms. Private rooms were so cheap, everyone just got a private room. Nowadays, there's like boutique hostels and all that jazz. But some guy was like, yeah, I'll share a dorm with you. Not a dorm, a room with you. And I was like, cool. Met with this guy. And we all went out and partying. And he's like, listen, if you want to take someone home, that's fine. I was like, yeah, it's fine. Just like, put a sock on the door kind of thing. And, I'll stay out. And so he ends up taking this. So I'm home sleeping. He brings someone home. And I was like, okay, I'll leave the room so you can, have lots of fun. And then I'll go out there and there's tons of mosquitoes and I'm falling asleep and he never got me. He never came and got me. And so I would just woke up covered in mosquito bites. And at the end of the day, I was like, dude, what the fuck? I didn't know this guy beforehand. I was like, I hope you went all night? He's like, actually, she left. I just fell asleep and forgot to get you. And I totally remember writing about that in my diary, like, fuck this guy. Like he could have came and got me. He was just too drunk and forgot. And I was covered in bug bites. And I totally blanked on that story. Or the two guys I met in Hanoi that I ended up staying with in Birmingham. Totally forgot about that. So I definitely recommend keeping a journal while you travel, because if you do decide to write a book or just try to remember things later on, it will come in really handy about all the stuff you totally forget and gloss over. But so back to the book. So as I wrote it, I realized it can't be a linear story. There needs to be a moment where there's a change that happens, and there's an end. We work toward an ending. And to be honest, I had no idea how to write that. I write practical books. It's very easy to write a book that is how to pick a credit card. Do this, do that, we're done. Writing a story that had to have dialogue, I had no idea how to do that. I'm used to writing 1,500 word stories on a blog post. Pretty easy, it's condensed. I'm contracted for a 60,000 plus word minimum. I think we ended at 65,000 words. And I didn't know how to do that. So I ended up buying a lot of books on writing. I really recommend The Writer's Way. It talks about the hero's journey. And so if you think of any story you've ever read, it all follows the hero's journey. There's three books in the three kind of genres in the world. There's the relationship, the self-discovery, and I forget what the last one is. But they all, or there's the quest. They all follow this sort of journey, right? There's the character protagonist living in his world. Something happens that causes him to change. He goes on this journey, faces a bunch of obstacles, decides he can't finish the quest, is then recalled to action and then finishes the quest, right? So like think of Lord of the Rings is the perfect example of the hero's journey, right? Even looking at the movie The Great Gatsby, the book The Great Gatsby. Here he is living in his world. He meets Gatsby, that's the change. He goes on this crazy journey learning about this world of Gatsby he lives in. He withdraws away from that world. When he like realizes he has to help Gatsby, get involved with Daisy and like they're doing, he just doesn't like it, and then he's recalled to action. Gatsby dies, and then he's dealing with the lessons he learned and the development of in that whole experience. That's a hero's journey. And so I also took Aaron Sorkin's masterclass because it was lots about dialogue, read Save the Cat, lots of stuff about Ask My Cousin, who wrote the book You, because she writes lots of dialogue. So then I decided that, okay, I have this, I need the journey. So I got a giant whiteboard at my co-working space and I plotted it out and changed it all around so that it wouldn't follow a linear pattern. It would follow the emotional arc of a trip around the world. So it wouldn't just be like, I did this and here we are, fast forward 10 years later. It would be like, okay, what is the stages of a trip around the world? And then I will fit each stage, each story into those stages. And so then I wrote it that way. Still pretty much sucked. And I ended up putting it down for like 5 months. And then I happened to read Tahir Shah's book, In Arabian Nights. And in this book, he's talking about following the footsteps of his dad, who was also a writer. And his hero's journey was rediscovering his dad. And he sort of has 2 time tracks. It's like him now, and then him going back talking about his memories of his childhood. And it was there that I realized that the thing that was really missing was the time jumps. And so what you notice in the book is that each chapter jumps. Every chapter is its own decade. And so there's a lot of back and forth. Like, here I am, now we're going back. Here I am, now we're going back. And so that was sort of like the third draft of the book that I sent to my editor. And I told her, I was like, okay, there's a lot of things I'm doing wrong here. And I know it was way too repetitive. And it was very slow in some places. And she kicked it back to me and said, you're absolutely right, fix it. And that's when I learned a valuable lesson. Editors are not there to fix your writing unless you're like, they know you're a celebrity who's gonna sell 1 million books. So I hired my own editor and we worked through this, and he went through and deleted all the repetition. And then one of the problems I have is getting very emotional. Erica can attest to this. The team likes to call me Mr. Robot, not because I look like the guy, but because I'm kind of like am. And so one of the parts of when I sent it to like my friends to read and all that stuff was that it didn't really go deep into a lot of the emotional stuff. And so my editor really helped me work through that. He would just take sections and be like, I want you to focus a little bit more on this thought. I want 1,000 words. And so he was sort of like my writing coach. And so that reduced a lot of the repetition and brought out a lot of the more emotional aspects of the trip around the world. And that is the book you have today. I still think it needs another edit. I was rereading it recently to pull out quotes for social media. And I was like, ooh, I would want to phrase this way. And I could cut this more. But, in talking to my editor, he's like, Matt, your life is very boring. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means like, you don't have, like, you weren't kidnapped, you weren't stabbed, like you didn't, you know, like flee like a natural disaster or some sort of civil war. And so the book itself doesn't have like a crazy inflection point where like we're all going to die and then that races off the book. And so he's like, what we really need to do is, you know, focus more on like the emotional aspects of travel rather than travel stories. In fact, if you read a lot of the reviews online, which I do because all authors do, but they know it's never a good thing to do emotionally. I do, and thank God Goodreads doesn't let you reply to people because, man, I would be in the comments like no tomorrow. But people really expect a lot of travel stories from it. But that actually wasn't the purpose of the book. I never intended it to be, here's all these stories that happened, because that was actually the first version of it. And there was no essential arc. I think maybe if I had a collection of short stories, that would be better. But if you actually think of any travel book you've ever read, they are not a bunch of stories tied together, right? Think of Wild. Wild is about one thing, her hiking to PDC. It's not about what she did before or after or like her journey on the road. It's about this one thing. Even if you take a book that does cover more ground, like On the Road, where he's on the road, it's not a collection of stories of his travels. It's literally the arc of the road trip, right? But I'm not covering like my life in Bangkok. And if I wrote that book, I can include tons of little stories. I'm covering 10 years of travel. So there are points where things slow down and pick up and slow down and pick up. And so to create a real interesting book, you have to follow something that's more an emotional arc rather than say a story arc, because it's not one story I would be telling. It would be a collection of stories. Thus, it would have to be a book about short stories. Even think of like fiction, right? Lord of the Rings, to go back to that. It's not about like stories about Frodo's life where he did this and that and that. It's about his one quest to destroy the ring. And so we end up in the book we have today. The ending of the book was changed constantly. I still don't really love the ending, but I changed it repeatedly through the end. Up until Final Prince, I didn't actually have an ending to it. I kept changing it. In fact, you might have picked up a couple of typos in the book. Well, that is again my fault because apparently I decided to make some changes after it had already been proofread. And unbeknownst to me, they shipped that, me assuming that, because I mean, this document is just all marked up. I mean, there's like, and I was just told to add my changes and track them. And, you know, it's very hard to read a track change document when like there's every line is like someone has comments. And so they just accepted my changes without reading them. And that's why if you ever see a typo in the book, that's a change that I decided to make after it had already been proofread, right before it went to the printer. So it's all been corrected in the Kindle version and in the second print run. But if you have a first print run and you're like, there's a typo here, that's because then you're looking at a change that happened in early March, like 2 days before it had to go to the printer so it could come out in July. And I was like, no, I don't like this line. I want to keep changing it. One of the hardest parts of being a writer is letting go and like putting it out into the world. Eventually you have to do that. And I was this close to doing it. Actually, I would have been okay, but I really wish there had been a proofread. And I got really upset. And then my agent was like, this is your fault. You know, you submitted too late. And I was like, they still should have read it, but it's all fixed now. At least if you have the Kindle book. But yeah, that's a funny aside about writing. So yeah, that's the book, and that's what I really, you know, the takeaway I want is like this book to end up in hostels around the world where people can pick up small sections, and that's why it follows. It's not a singular story, so you can just read a chapter and get the whole sort of 10 years within that chapter, and then like put it down. Let's say you just pick up like the part about, you know, coming home. You can just read that chapter, get a sense of that emotional journey, and never have to read the before and after. Like if you have to leave the hostel, you know, and you still get a complete story. So it's like one story, but a whole bunch of little stories underneath it. So sort of creating this timeless, like emotional arc of travel. And I think the people that it resonates with the most, I think the people who dislike it the most are the people who wanted to pick up a book that's a singular story and just read it like you would read, you know, Under the Tuscan Sun or something. But the people who enjoy it the most are the people who travel or want to travel and have sort of felt those feelings and have a sense of like being there and have been there in the past. So yeah, wow, 72 messages. Cool, there's lots of comments here. I love it. Wait, someone mentioned the typos.
Yeah, we have a ton of people just like reflecting on what they got out of your book. And so I would love to read some of those just in case people aren't paying attention to the chat. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So, and then you guys can think of your questions. And like I said, just like raise your hand virtually or visibly and you can ask it. But Isabel is saying that she loved learning that even an introvert can meet friends on the road, which is a very inspiring thing. Denise is saying that my favorite part is how others judge your travel. I always feel that way. Brooke is saying that I resonated with the idea that we can never run away from our problems. And then there's just so many people that just really, I feel like just what you were saying, are talking about how they're reading your book to reflect on their own journeys. Like no matter if they were on the road for 10 years or for, you know, 2 weeks, it really is relatable. And that's what keeps coming up over and over. And people really appreciated the emotional side. I just want to say, that's what I appreciated the most out of this book. I feel like I worked with Matt for 7 years very closely. And the second that I finished that book, I had felt like I grew like 4 times closer to knowing you. And I thought that was like the most special part of the book. So you guys that haven't spent 7 years with Nomadic Matt, you guys are like already knowing him so much better than I did the first 7 years. Or 6 years, I guess. I read it last year. Okay, so well, we have 2 questions. Sorry, Matt?
I was just saying, Erica spends most of her life trying to like help me with emotional intelligence. When she's like, you can't write this email this way. It sounds too short. I'm like, but it's just right to the point. And she's like, no, you can't just be so blunt. I'm like, but why waste time not being blunt? So
listen, to Matt's credit, if I wrote blog posts, they would be all novels. So you don't want to read what I write. Okay, so we had some questions that actually came through on our forum. We made a little forum for this. And Kathleen Riley of Doha, I love Doha, is saying, what did you pack in your bag for your very first trip? And can you elaborate a little bit more about managing or breaking that working abroad expat routine that you've tried to escape once you fall into it?
What did I pack for my first trip? I had a giant REI bag that was about always half full. I basically just had like a couple of t-shirts. I had a jacket, sweaters that I ended up abandoning, swimwear, flip-flops, and sneakers. I don't think I had any dress shoes. I ended up buying some when I lived in Bangkok and taking them with me to Australia. But yeah, the start was just a small backpack of just like quintessential backpacker gear, toiletries, books. I did not travel with a laptop back then. Or I mean, 2006, I had
no smartphones.
no smartphone, just a camera phone. I carried an so extra SD cards, and books, not a lot of electronics, an iPod, like an actual iPod, because no smartphones. Um, and that was about it. Not a lot, pretty much the quintessential backpacker packing list we have on the website. Um, Lots of socks. And I ended up just like taking more clothes than I needed and just leaving stuff as I went. Um,
What you don't know until you know it, you know.
uh, and then about expat life, um, I really loved expat life to be, but it is a routine is a routine is a routine, right? So, we all want to travel, break out of our routine, see the world, but the backpacking lifestyle is itself in many ways a routine that you burn out of. Expat lifestyle is also its own little bubble where you end up only hanging around with foreigners and maybe the sort of more westernized locals that hang around with foreigners. And so like I love Bangkok, but the vast majority of my friends living there were not Thai, they were international. I only had a few Thai friends. And the same is true for my time in Taiwan also. Um, it was only when I lived in Amsterdam, Stockholm, and recently Paris that I had more local friends, but those were people I had met traveling who happened to live in that city. So they were sort of my gatekeepers into local life. But expat life, is very insular. Here I am in Tulum, not hanging out with everyone because there's just so much COVID here, but that's a different story. But like I can just watch them all like just hanging out with other Americans or Brits or Canadians, like not really interacting with a lot of the locals. And I think that is one downside to expat life. It's so easy because everyone's speaking English. Like you can there's a great network of friends. You're all sort of recreating home together. That it creates this sort of frictionless entry into a country that just becomes sort of like this black hole that's hard to escape from.
Wonderful, thanks. And then Jade McLean of Florida is asking, I feel like this is a question that a lot of people have after reading the book, but especially since we're a community of travelers and people that typically would be on the road longer than other people. In your book, you discuss meeting women who you become emotionally involved with for a time and end up accepting the ending as a natural part of the nomadic life. Her question is, do you think a nomadic person or somebody that really just loves to travel all the time can realistically hope to have a lasting relationship while continuing to pursue their love of travel? Or do you think they have to choose one or the other?
Yeah, I know many couples who have found each other on the road. I've been to some of their weddings. I think finding love on the road is definitely possible. But like everything, it's a matter of timing. I mean, if you think about the book Revolve has two major relationships in it. Three if you count the one in Bangkok. But in each one of them, the timing was off, right? And so one of us wanted to stay and one of us wanted to go. And so, that's what it always comes down to, right? Like somebody has to stay and somebody has to go. And so if somebody doesn't change their plans, it's hard, because eventually your itinerary is like, well, I was going to go this way and we're going to go this way. And so like, what are you going to do? Some plans have to be changed. Eventually distance becomes too great. You can't have a forever long distance relationship. That's just not going to work out. And so in all those situations, it was I was never ready to stay, or in the end, Samantha was never ready to stay. In fact, there was a relationship after this book with somebody in London, and then she ended up moving to Dubai, and I was like, I could have seen myself moving to London. I don't see myself moving to Dubai for the rest of my life. So, again, somebody has to make a change, and I think the relation. I just wasn't that person at that time, but I've seen many relationships happen on the road that have lasted. And I think if you can travel with somebody and you are a good travel couple, you're probably going to be a great couple in life.
Yeah. I'd also say that now that COVID has turned so many jobs remote, there's more hope than there used to be, because if you have a travel priority travel as one of your priorities, and so do they, and you can actually work and travel, then there's more possibilities there, whereas lots of people had to stay somewhere, and now it's not so much like that. That was a great question, Jane, and thank you so much, Matt. Okay, so we have a question about the book process from Denise Love the last name. What was the process for finding an editor for this book?
So when you get a publisher, they assign you an editor. So I had one with the imprint, St. Martin's Press. Being a writer, I happen to know a lot of people who are editors. So getting an extra editor was pretty easy, because I just asked around for like 2 people who were accepting clients. But if you're like, where do I start? A great way to start is find an author you like, flip to the back of the book, and see who their editor is. Like, who edited their book, and kind of do a little Google hunt for their email and be like, hey, like, I am writing a book. I'm looking for an editor. I would preface that email by saying, I'm not looking to edit or like pitch my book to you, because there's a whole separate process for that. All I want to know is, can you recommend a place where I can hire an editor independently? And they might have a recommendation for you. Because if you're just cold emailing them saying, and I would like to hire you, they're going to be like, well, I don't take freelance work, and you have to get an agent, and like, you have to make it very clear you're not trying to pitch their book to them, your book to them. You're literally just looking to hire an editor. Upwork really works well, and LinkedIn, and then just Googling like editor, like Googling editors for books. You will come with a bunch of like, author societies have lists of editors that they keep that take on freelance clients. If you are looking for an editor, the person who edited my first book, How to Travel the World on $50 a Day, is an independent editor now. So her name is, I have to remember her last name.
And Brie DeRoche. She did some of our editing for some of the guidebooks.
Oh yeah, here it is. This is her. Maria Gagliano. She was good. I liked her. She's the only editor I've ever had that I really loved.
Great question. We have another one from Talik about the process. How much time between announcing your book and it actually being published is ideal?
Announcing your book and publishing it. If you're doing it through a company, like traditional, they have their own timeline, which is is just really just a suggested timeline, because my book was originally supposed to come out in 2018, and then I just kept pushing it. So that's not something you can control. However, if you're self-publishing your book, I wouldn't announce it until it's done. No reason to. I would just write the book, get it edited, and say, maybe like a month before, being like, hey, next month I have a book coming out. If you buy an advance copy now, I'll give you all sorts of other perks to get people to buy in advance. But for our self-edited, non-traditional books, I just write and then we announce that we have it.
Yep.
Because
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a question from Hannah about the book contents itself. So what story or moment in the book sticks out to you as the most difficult thing you had to write about?
The most difficult thing I had to write about is probably the relationship sections. Would be the most difficult ones. Yeah, those two.
And she has another part of the question that says, did you struggle with having to be honest when you may not have behaved in a way that you were proud of?
I knew my parents were going to read this book, and they were going to find out a bunch of stuff about my life I just purposely don't write about or tell them, because they don't really need to know. And so I knew every time I mentioned drinking, and oh my God, that's another comment people make. They're always like, this guy's always partying and drinking. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm 26 in most of the books. In most of the book. Yeah, I was like, oh, my parents are going to think I'm an alcoholic. They always hate how much I drink now, and I drink like twice a week. But I don't know. Life is about learning lessons, right? So like, I mean, I am who I am today because of we all are who we are because of the mistakes we make. So like, can I say I did a lot? We can all say we've done a lot of stupid shit when we were younger. But if we didn't do that stupid shit, would you really be where we are? So it sort of goes to like the essence of that book I really love called Dark Matter. Are you happy with your life? And that whole book explores, and like all the roads not taken, and then you realize like for all the path you take, usually the ones you're meant to be on.
So true. Very wise words. We have a question from Irene that says, what does the concept of home mean to you today after all the traveling you've done?
Home is where I feel most comfortable and where my stuff is. So for me, home is where I go to unwind and recharge my travel battery. So that's Austin, but it's anywhere. But I also feel at home in Bangkok. I feel at home in Paris. I feel at home in New York. Anywhere in Japan. Home is like that place whose frequency aligns with your frequency, and it's just a match. But like, if home doesn't necessarily need to be a place, it can be a way of thinking, or it could just, a way of feeling. But also in that sense, like I'm going home is where I am, where I just sit on my couch for like a month. So there's multiple homes in my world. There's where I sleep and recharge my battery, but there's also the places around the world where I feel like this is where I belong.
Totally. Before we end, I just wanted to know if anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask and unmute themselves, or anything they wanted to say to Matt, the author.
You can use your hands because we don't have, there should be a little hand raising button that will jump you to the top.
Anyone? Or you could wave your hand.
Raise your hand or just unmute yourself. Here we go. Nancy has one.
Yeah, Matt. I just wanted to say I'm listening to you talking. I've seen you in person in Montreal, and I just watched your recommendation to view Map for Saturday, and it sounds like Map for Saturday was written with you in mind. There is such a similarity. I don't know if you watched that before or after, or if you were influenced at all by it, but that was also a very touching movie.
Yeah, so A Map for Saturday came out in 2007, or yeah.
Yeah, 7. Yeah.
2008. The guy it's a great movie about backpacking. It basically captures the entire emotional arc of a backpacking trip. I've seen it like 3 or 4 times. I always share it to friends. I actually watched it in 2012 before my first book came out and I had to go home. That was sort of like the first, like, okay, this is all over. I'm really done traveling. And I like bawled my eyes out and then sat drinking on a beach in Cambodia by myself. And people, it's actually, I think that's in the book. Yeah. So the reason why I get so emotional is I just finished watching that movie and I was like, holy shit, I'm really going home. But yeah, I would say I was probably influenced by that movie in writing the book and thinking in terms of like, you know, can I create a story arc as good as Brooke created his movie story arc? So that movie, yeah, it definitely influenced me. I think it's the best movie of all time that captures what long-term travel is like.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Nancy.
We missed, let's see, anyone have their hands raised in the video chat?
Or comments?
I guess we're good. Okay, before you all leave, someone unmute themselves?
No, me, sorry.
All right, before you all leave, thank you so much for joining our first book club. You know, we're working out the kinks, you know, and all that jazz. And next month, it's always going to be on the first Wednesday of every month. So you can always plan at this time, 12 p.m. Eastern, every Wednesday, you know. And we do it this time because this time zone captures the most international time zones possible. So we like really want to do it then. But yeah, first Wednesday every month at noon, we record them and then they go up on our Patreon, which we're soon migrating to our own exclusive pool membership site on the site. But that's a January 2021 surprise for you all. So you'll be able to get all these recordings and just access to them. Erica has put up the next one, which is Looking for Trans Wonderland by Nu Sarawia. She's a British author, British Nigerian, but lives in Britain and has since she's like 10. I picked it up earlier this year. It's probably the best travel book I've read all year. Super engrossing, amazingly well written, very visual. I like immediately fell in love with it, couldn't put it down. Really, she goes back to Nigeria, you know, to get reacquainted with her dad, who had, well, I don't want to spoil it for you. She gets reacquainted with her family and in her country, having really just spent the majority of her years in England and never really wanted to go back to Nigeria. So that's going to be January 2nd. I don't know what the date is.
January
6th.
And I dropped the link in the chat, so you can RSVP with the link in the chat and also grab a copy of her book so that you could read it over the next month.
Yeah, and Erica always has an ending to these things, so I'll stop talking and let her go.
Yeah, very excited about this one. And then also we have a ton of events coming up. Tomorrow at noon, we have an event all about Portugal and where to go outside of the normal places that people usually go. Next week, we have all these great hut-to-hut treks around the world worth doing. So if you like to hike, or if you want to learn how to hike and do that in other countries, that would be a great one for you to attend. And we also have a really special event with Kristen Addis, who is I would call her a superstar blogger, someone who's been around for a while, and she's done pretty much everything in the blogging world. And one of her most recent pursuits is starting a sustainable women's clothing line. And so Matt will be hosting that one. It's going to be awesome. It's next Wednesday at the same time. So if you can come to that, that will be amazing. You can find all of our upcoming events at that, URL at the top. And then I just wanted to share about our Patreon membership again. So this is a really great way for you to just connect with our community, connect with our team, and be a part of the Nomadic Matt and the Nomadic Network movement of budget travel and really creating these trips of your dreams. And I just wanted to add that Matt's parents are not in the Patreon community. And so he actually shares quite a few stories that he would never share in his books or blog. So if you want those stories, this is where to find them if you can actually go out for a happy hour with Matt so that he can tell you those stories. So this is the second best place to find them. And you can do that on patreon.com/nomadicmatt. And then thank you so much for being a part of our travel community. I actually, before we go, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know we said that we would pass out or, share books with you. And so I actually kept track of everybody that was commenting their favorite parts. And I'm a huge community member. I really appreciate when people contribute and create that community by commenting and all that stuff. So I just wanted to say that we are going to gift the next book club book by New to 3 members that had actually shared their favorite parts. I've done this with a random number generator right before this ending. And so Denise Love, you're one of the winners. And then we also have Michelle Pinario. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Wonderful. And then we have Jane McLean. So if the 3 of you are still in here, can you just send me your full name and address either by DM or to info@thenomadicnetwork.com, and I'll send you your books for next month. That would be perfect. Congrats, everyone. And I hope that you guys come back next month. We are very excited for this, and you guys have really made it special. So thank you so, so, so much. Bye, everyone.